Started. Hi, everyone. Happy spring migration. Welcome and thanks for joining us for our March Lunch and Learn. I am Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at HMA, and I'm going to be facilitating things with Kat Lauer. She's the HMA Engagement and Communications Coordinator. And we're very excited to welcome Tony Celis, who's going to be reflecting on a century supporting and advancing management and conservation science at the USGS Bird Banding Lab. I know many of you are familiar with or involved in bird banding efforts. Lots of Hawkwatch sites have affiliated raptor banding stations, so we're going to get a behind the scenes look at what happens at the banding lab and some of its history and future plans. Many of you tune into Lunch and Learn each month, but for those of you who are new or maybe new to the Hawk Migration Association, we are a nonprofit that provides support to the Raptor Migration Monitoring Network across the Americas. And we promote education and conservation of migratory raptors and archive all that migration count data in our database, hawkcount.org. You guys know the Zoom drill, but a few things before we start. We're recording this talk. We're also live streaming on our Facebook page. You can view any of our past Lunch and Learn programs on our website by scrolling down to our What's New section or looking under Events and Tours. And our website is now www.hawkmigration.org, since we're no longer the Hawk Migration Association of North America. We're just Hawk Migration Association. The audio and video we've disabled today just because it's the best way to reduce distractions. But even though you're muted, please connect with us. You can use the chat for comments and questions for Tony. Kat's going to be reading your questions at the end, and you can tell us where you're joining from. We love hearing that. And lastly, you can always put your name and email into the window, into the chat, if you want to receive our e-newsletter, if you don't already receive that goes out a couple times a month. So I'll hand things over to Kat.
Hi, everyone. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Antonio Celis Murillo, Chief of the U.S. Geological Survey National Bird Banding Lab, or BBL. Tony collaborates with the BBL team and partners to maintain the lab as the premier resource for long-term banding and marking data in North America. His vision is to enhance the BBL as an integrated scientific resource that quickly adapts to emerging research needs, study methods, and technologies to support effective bird management and conservation science. Tony earned his Bachelor of Science in Biology from the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Morelos in Mexico, followed by Masters in Integrative Biology and a Ph.D. in Natural Resources and Environmental Science from the University of Illinois. He later held a postdoctoral research position at the Illinois Natural History Survey. Tony's research focuses on various aspects of avian ecology and behavior with an overarching goal of improving conservation efforts. His work includes studies on bird migration, stopover ecology, population dynamics of species of concern, and bioacoustics. Welcome, Tony. Please begin your presentation when you're ready.
Thank you, Kat, for the introduction, and thank you, Julia, for the invite. And first and foremost, I want to thank you, everyone, for attending the Lunch and Learn. I think it's great work that HMA is doing already, and having all people connected together. It's a great opportunity for talking about things that we all love, birds, basically. And well, you already are seeing my slide, and yes, this is basically the bird banding lab. It's been more than a century supporting advancing management and conservation science. And that's why I'm here to give you a little bit more information about who we are and what we do. Julia mentioned a little bit about this, but what I'm going to be talking today is about, I'm going to give you a little bit about the history of the bird banding lab, why we are here, basically, and touch on a few things that we are doing today and explain you what's our responsibility as a federal permitting office, how we do it, and touch on a few success stories that clearly showcase the impact that we've been having over time. And I'm going to close with a little bit about what's next for the BBL. Yeah, the BBL, you probably know the acronym for the Bird Banding Lab. So I may use BBL often here and there. And just in case, I know you are all, you all love birds and are involved in working with birds one way or another, from bird watching all the way to science. But just in case, for those who are not familiar with bird banding, the technique is just very simple. It's just simply the attachment of a small mark or band, usually aluminum or metal, that is placed on the bird's leg. When we catch the bird, we put the bird's leg, we collect data, and we release that bird immediately in a very safe way. Birds leave, and we hope that in the future we will encounter that bird again. Could be in a different place, in our place, live, dead, anything. But at least the important part of that is that because those bands have unique numbers, we have the ability, scientists, to connect the banding data when we capture the birds for the first time, and we call it encounter or recapture data when we found the same band number later on in life. Sometimes once, sometimes multiple times, depending on the lifespan of the bird. But using those two pieces of information, it really allows us to track the movements of the birds, know where they go, study their behavior, migration, lifespan, and many, many other things that I will be talking in this meeting. So obviously we use these bird banding data to understand biology and the ecology of birds and being able to make some management and conservation decisions or plans. And to start giving you a little bit of context of why the Bird Banding Lab was founded and established, really our story starts late 1800s, where obviously, as you know, all North America, there were zero regulations at that time, especially around 1850 to the end of the 1800s. We clearly noticed that, yes, we didn't have regulations, and it was very, very evident that we had a lot of practices at that time where it was clear and very evident excessive take. They were market hunters all over the place. It was a normal practice for many, where basically they just shoot and shoot and shoot animals or capture animals for sale, for feathers, you remember those pictures with hats and all kinds of feathers, all kinds of different practices that happened. And it was very evident that it was an excessive, and it was clear that it happened because we didn't have regulations at that time. But obviously by, we present, basically, we saw how many birds basically were either populations decimated. It was clear for those who were scientists studying populations at that time. And we have very well-known cases, at least in the United States. This is a picture of Walton Ford, the passenger pigeon that was an endemic to North America. Everybody have documentation that it was a very, very common bird everywhere. And in 1914, I think that was the end of this species. When it extinct, I think it was the last passenger pigeon died in a Cincinnati zoo. They were some evidence that there was probably a mix between diseases, but also excessive hunting. So long story short, we all knew the early 1900s that we needed regulations. We needed to figure out how to make management of populations in a proper way. And that's why in 1918, United States came out with this Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Perhaps some of you are familiar with this. People call it the MBTA, which is Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which basically prohibited the hunting, killing, capturing, possessing, sale, transportation, and exportation of birds, feathers, eggs, and nests without prior authorization, which means if you have a permit and you go through a permitting process, you can probably take birds out of the environment if it's justified. So at that moment, 1918 is when they realized, well, that's great. Now we have this Migratory Bird Treaty Act. This is going to help us for management and conservation of birds. But definitely we need a unified program that will take that responsibility of giving the federal permits, but also bring all the data that we can take at the same time we're giving permits. So in reality, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is what it led to the bird banding law to be established. At that time, early 1900s, I like to talk about two key scientists. I feel like they were visionaries, Paul Bartsch and Leon Cole. By that time, they were scientists, one of them working with Smithsonian. And they were already marking birds, trying to understand movements of birds, trying to understand the status of the populations of birds. And they had a really I will say, futuristic perspective where they thought, okay, if we're giving permits, we can also give bans to make sure we have unique numbers in the country, but also ask the scientists to collect all the data and send us in a repository. Because in the future, we will need to track those populations and we may have ecological crisis or something, and we will need long-term and large-scale database or data to understand the bird populations and make management decisions. It's like they were clearly way, way advanced thinking of this, and they were pushing a lot to recommend we need a systematic bird banding protocol to ensure that it's stored in the same way, and we need to build this long-term and large-scale repository to allow answering questions. So they really push a lot, and ultimately in 1920, it got completely established, completely backed up by the federal government, established in 1920 to support specifically collection, archiving, management, and dissemination of information from banded and marked birds in North America. Obviously, the primary role was giving those permits, but also keeping in mind that the data was very important to collect in a standardized way. This is a picture of the first chief of the bird banding lab. Came from Smithsonian, and he was basically the one who took the monumental task of building the foundation of the lab and developing every scientific method and technique to capture birds, mark birds, and collect data in the field. So yeah, Lincoln over the early years, he really worked with as many scientists as he could around the country to develop a simple numbering scheme, what kind of the band sizes we will use, procure bands, how you will take notes. I mean, it really, every detail that for us banders today is just in a book. They really work with trial and error, trying testing materials, sizes of bands, shapes of bands, everything they could. It really took a lot of time. This is just a picture of 1920 and 1923 manuals for how to do bird banding. And basically, they really got into the task of in addition to the permits, develop the bird banding methods in North America. Obviously, in the first decade of the bird banding lab, there were already a bunch of groups across North America working and thinking about birds, about marking birds and using bird banding to track birds. They were 4 associations that they were basically the right arms of the bird banding lab. Bird banding lab being situated in Washington, D.C. You can imagine 1920 to try to communicate with banders and bring banders on board as volunteer amateur banders. They needed a better way to manage people across the landscape. So these associations were strategically placed and divided the country in different groups. Like that was the New England Bird Banding Association, the Inland, Eastern, and Western, and even the Canadian Bird Banding Association at that time, later become the Bird Banding Office. They were covering different regions of North America as a way to coordinate all the efforts, gather all the data, and communicate with the center repository, which was the Bird Banding Lab. So yeah, thanks to the Bird Banding Association since 1922, they were already involved, and it was basically, I will say, our first attempt of citizen science at that time. Today, 105 years later, of course, we're still here. You can imagine all what we passed through for 105 years, and you can think the end of World War I, World War II, big recession, Vietnam, organizational government reorganizations, and think about all what you can think about 100 years. Luckily, we're still here today, and today the Bird Banding Lab keeps growing and keeps doing what we were set to do since the beginning. Federal permitting responsibility, support the collection, archiving, management, and dissemination of the banded data, and keep advancing bird banding science as much as we can. We consider today, after 100 years, not just an operational program. Yes, we are not just about giving bans and permits, but also we consider ourselves a more integrated scientific program that can help in many other things and advance bird science, but also touch on other scientific aspects and management and conservation needs. Well, you see this is a picture of our refuge. We are located in Laurel, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. That we have our own, we are at the Patuxent Refuge, which is a national wildlife refuge. It's actually the first wildlife refuge in the United States that was established for scientific research. So we have a enclosed environment, really, really big. I don't remember I have the numbers later. It's a very big area with lots of ponds, lots of woods, areas that are untouched, areas that are managed. And we are inside the refuge, and that's our building. So it's a paradise. It's kind of apocalyptic during COVID times because no one was here. So you walk in and like you don't see people, and it's a huge area. I can do 12 miles in my bike in a couple rounds in the area. So it's a beautiful place. So I said we are in a scientific program right now because in addition to BBL permitting, we do all those things that you see around the circles. Of course, we have a scientific component we have a lot of researchers connected to us that we are doing specific biology or ecology projects addressing different questions. We have a community science program. We try to connect with the people a lot using bird banding. We have an educational component. Of course, we have an international participation. We have a program called Banders Without Borders, where we connect with all the banders across the world and all the big bird banding offices to coordinate data and practices in general. We have an analytical capacity. We have many researchers in our center here doing specifically analysis for bird populations. We also have the Bird Survey next to us, so we have a lot of information related to bird populations, and biometricians and statisticians were focusing on that. Of course, our main emphasis is keeping up with our database infrastructure, which is where we receive all the data. And we work with federal and state and local groups on the management of waterfall and flyways, which later I will show you what it means. So yeah, we are a pretty diverse team right now, and we do a lot more than just permitting. Our database, so far, it's more than 86 million bandings. Encounters, as I said, those are reports of those birds, more than 5 million. I think they're like 6 million right now. And we receive every year 1.2 million bandings and about 120K encounters annually. I think this last year, after COVID, it seems like we've seen an increase of activity on bird banding. I think this year we received close to 200,000 reports of birds. So that means bird watchers and people is out there with their binoculars, and they are reporting sightings of birds banded. And we manage close to 9,000 federal permittees. We have a system that's called master bander and sub-permittees. Sub-permittees work for the master bander, and we try to communicate directly with the master banders. So they help us like manage sub-permits. But yeah, overall, there are like 9,000 people who has permits across the country. Just in the US, there are 1,000 in Canada. And we talk with them every day and for whatever they need, because in their permits, in addition to just being able to go and capture birds, they also need to have specific authorizations in the permit depending on the science they're doing or the type of capturing they're doing. Generally, our communities are, I like to divide them in 3 groups. Flywheel Council, which is federal and state agencies. So many states have mandates to fill a banding quota per year related to the waterfall management. So we are in touch with all federal agencies and states groups to coordinate bird banding across the country, very well established. We talk with scientists, could be scientists from NGOs, from universities, from anywhere really, whatever science they're doing, they need to contact us, because anyone in the US who needs to capture a bird and mark a bird needs to come to our office first. And of course, we work with avocational banders. Avocational banders is, I kind of don't like that word, but in reality is people who is qualified and has experience to work with birds, despite being a professional scientist or not. They are banders with the qualifications to do banding, and they support bird banding practices across the country greatly. They are everywhere, and they are doing such great work. And of course, I mentioned hunters there because everyone who calls and reports banded birds to us are considered our people. So like I said, this year we received 200,000 reports of birds. They could be bird watchers, hunters, or anyone who found a marked bird or a band with a number. I'm just showing here a couple maps. The first one, the one above, is just I look at the database, and we have historically over 100 years more than 150,000 banding locations where basically someone is being collecting birds either sporadically, regularly, or maybe only once. But basically, we've been monitoring everywhere across the country. And reports of those birds, of course, is not just the US, it's all North America, or actually all the world, as you can think about some species crossing continents occasionally, or going through Alaska all the way to China and Russia. And there's a lot of movement of birds, and we get reports from all over the place. Generally, what we do with federal permits is that someone who needs to capture a bird and mark a bird for a scientific project, they come to us, they submit an application that is, I would say, straightforward, as long as they show that they have a scientific project that justifies the activity, they have experience and training, and some letters of recommendations, they can get a permit. And then we just work with them and give them a permit. And once they join our database, they get bands for free from us with unique numbers, and they go out and do their science. After they do their science, they send the data to us, and we keep our repository in check, curating and cleaning the data and disseminating the data as soon as possible. So yeah, we spend a lot of time on the federal permitting. Those are our day-to-day activities. Of course, we have some applications. We have a bander portal where all the banders who are permitted, they can access there, they can request the bands. You can imagine a portal just like the one that you use for your doctor or your bank. It's the same. You can go here and access if you are a permitted bander, and then you get all these type of resources. You can request your bands, you can manage your data, see your data, submit your data, everything. So we spend a lot of time in our applications trying to improve our applications, make sure they are user-friendly and everyone can use them. And yeah, we spend a lot of time supporting banders on managing their data here. We also spend a lot of time on our website application reportband.gov. This is the place where everybody can report bands. And like I said, last year, we got 200,000 reports. As you can imagine, those reports sometimes need a lot of work and connect with the people who reported those birds to get further more information. Sometimes they report amazing things, and we need to check with them if it's really a good site or if the number is right or all that stuff. So we spend a lot of time on working with the public generally on the reportband.gov site, where we allow them to submit the record. And sometimes it's all automated, so they can, if you have all the information and everything looks right, immediately you get a certificate of appreciation, we call it, where it tells you where the bird was banded, the age, the sex, and who banded the bird and all that stuff immediately. And if it takes more, if we don't have the data yet because it's a recently banded bird, it takes a little bit of a couple of weeks for you to get that information. But yeah, you can go to report band here and report your birds, and it works great. People really engage here, and in addition to submit the report, they sometimes want to talk to us about the birds, and it's very useful for us to engage with the community. And the ultimate goal we have is we have a lot of expertise here in our lab that are checking the data, curating the data, making sure everything is right, high quality data, and then we release it. We have multiple platforms to release the data. So the interesting part of this and why it's important that the federal government is supporting this lab is that this data, we follow the open data policy. So that means as soon as we curate the data, it's available and ready for everyone to download. Everyone can use it. And there are hundreds and hundreds of theses, projects, scientific projects, many states, counties, reserves, nature reserves, bird watchers, everyone uses this data. It's a little bit like, like in eBird, people goes and they can see distributions and things like that. A little bit like that, but the fact that we have bird banding data, you can imagine having the bird in the hand, we have a chance to collect a lot of data in demographic data, something that sometimes as a bird watcher you may not have. The fact that we know the age, we know the sex, we know the weight, the fat that has in the body, we know measurements, we know all these detailed information that we collect when we capture the bird. It's all released here. So there's a great resource that everyone uses, especially university students, scientists, NGOs, use this data to do their science, answer their questions, and go and download data from their state or their county or their location and try to do as much as they can. So it's really the key part of what we do is to ensure that this data is available for everyone, and you can download everything. Now we even have a site, Science-Base, I think is the one in the middle there. If you have like a very fancy approach, Python or R or whatever, you can download 100 years of data if you want for all these species and do what you want. So it seems like it's probably the most valuable part of what we do is to ensure that the data is available, because that's where all the other groups, Partners in Flight, and everyone uses this data for the state of the birds and to really keep track of bird populations over time. So we work with colleagues to do that. I said it's there, more than 1,200 peer-reviewed publications just with these data sets. That number is low now. We now know there's a lot more than that. Of course, we are vendors. We are all vendors. So we also have our vending station, considering that we have a nice location here in the bird vending lab. You are welcome to come if you are around. Since 1979, we've been banding birds. We have a banding station. We only band passerines at this point, but lately we've been getting into hummingbirds, and hopefully at some point we get into raptors too. So yeah, we've been expanding our operation here little by little. So this is our banding station. We have we have actually there are 12,000 acres that we have. And the banding station is right in the middle. So we have a really nice private property for running our banding station. Lots of volunteers. We have a bunch of volunteers nearby. I think last year we had 12 volunteers plus the employees working on the banding station. And we mostly do a maps station, which is spring, summer. And then we do the fall migration for passerines, which is, fall migration is usually a pretty nice activity. There's lots of stuff going on. Overall, our approach with our data and our science our goal is to work with partners and connect with as many partners as we want and try to give them support for anything, especially data, but also we engage with those groups to contribute on management and conservation science. These are just, don't get me wrong, these are not the only ones. There are hundreds of logos around, but I just put some just to remind me that that's what we do. We just connect with partners, and in our lab and the center, our goal is to really meet partner needs and science needs all the time. That's our goal. So any idea you have, send us an email. This is just an example. This is the coordinated effort of MAPS. They have 1,200 stations collecting data. We've been supporting MAPS for a long time, since the beginning. For many decades, they've been doing their own thing, but one way or another, we are connected with them and supporting them and helping them as much as we can. Just like this MAPS Institute of Bird Population that has 1,200 locations collecting data, there are all these other groups around. And I put Cape May, Black Swamp, Klamath. They have also networks by taxa specific, either for raptors or for owls or hummingbirds, just migration, passerines. You probably are aware there are many groups out there that are coordinated efforts, and we try to help them as much as we can. Especially when we can, since we have data management processes, sometimes we figure out how to make things more suitable for them, for their goals, for their specific stuff, and manage the data better with them. Now that we are improving our technology, we are even capable of helping specific groups for specific taxa on making sure their submission is flawless and easy, adapted to what they collect and what they do. So that's kind of our ultimate goal, to ensure that we support all the coordinated groups out there doing their science. In terms of, I will say, we have many, over 100 years, we have many successful stories, but I'm just going to mention a few briefly. I will say one of the most successful stories we have of our work in the work with our collaborators is the adaptive harvest management. This is, like I said, the flyway councils, where since 1950, actually 1940 something, scientists were very interested in understanding the situation, the status of waterfowl populations. At that time, we knew enough about bird bands and migration of waterfowl, and that's why the federal government and with us, when we were in Fish and Wildlife Service in the past, they set up the flyway system, which you see the map. It divides the flyways by migration paths of the birds and coordinated all those states across those flyways to be working together. And even since 1950 to today, we have a perfectly standardized system of banding on every state with specific quotas across the states, across each flyway. There is around 800,000 bands placed on birds per year. And it's been happening since 1950. So over time, we coordinate with every state and a quota for banding. That we call it pre-season banding because it's before the hunting season starts. And as soon as they finish banding, the hunting season starts, and they start. People goes out to shoot waterfowl, but over 70 years, we've been working in collaboration with hunters to ensure that they report everything properly and they tell us how much they killed. And that's why they report to reportband.gov if they found a bird with a band. And together, we put together a whole set of models with the data every year that ultimately allows us to study the population of waterfowl and set the hunting regulations for the following year. I mean, it's just a perfect combination of coordination with the hunters, with the states banding, hunters reporting, and us managing all the data, and a bunch of scientists from different agencies and universities modeling the data as a yearly basis to specifically give hunting regulations every year and ensure that ultimately the populations remain stable or improving. So this work really is one of the, I will say, larger projects where we are involved because it means, think about it, we send 800,000 to 1 million bands every year to distribute it across the country, all flyways. They put the bands, they collect the data, they send the data to us. We curate the data immediately. Hunting season starts right away. Everybody starts shooting waterfowl in their locations and reporting what they hunted with the bands too, through reportband.gov. We keep curating all the data, and by June, mid-June, we have a data set perfectly curated and clean of 800,000 to 1 million data points. We have the models ready to run. They run all the statistical models, and then we know exactly what are going to be the bag limits for the following year by species, by sex, by age. So we know the demographics really well, and we tell you can only hunt this year species 1, only 2 males and 1 female, only species 2, 2 females, 2 males. Basically, all the bag limits perfectly, and then get the hunting regulations for the following year. All these processes, this is a picture from the 3 Billion Birds paper. Probably some of you are familiar about this paper that came out in 2019, where we realized that populations are clearly declining since 1966. And if you see how waterfowl management, see the populations, they are the only ones who are not in decline. So that means it's been working, the flyway system, very well. Of course, they shoot the birds, but still, it's a practice that is manageable and that allows for conservation of the population. So this is just really one good example of how good management, including the people needs, working with partners, and using our long-term data set allows us to keep track of the populations very well. Another project that we were involved a lot, we're still somewhat involved, but not as much as in the past. We have 50-year project here in Patuxent where we were restoring whooping cranes. As you probably are aware, 1940s, we only had 21 birds in North America. And we had a captive program here. And as you can imagine, scientists were working on the genetics and all the captive program here, but they were also marking birds every day. And while they were releasing birds every year, you remember that they were tracking birds with training birds to migrate to the south. And you probably saw documentaries in National Geographic about all this work where the people needed to maintain them and wearing these costumes of cranes and feeding the birds, managing birds, everything happened here. But basically the important part of all that work behind the scenes, we were putting color bands with numbers and colors and tracking all the birds that they will release, relying on the people reporting those sightings of those birds in Florida and everywhere along their migration, and using that information to keep reaffirming whether our practices over 50 years were good or not for the population and restoration of the population. So this is how we are always kind of working behind the scenes in big projects, but we are basically a critical way to managing the events, the data, the reports, and using that data to do science. Another project that we have and we've been having for a long time is the albatross monitoring, Laysan and black-footed albatrosses in the Pacific Islands. This is a project since 1940s. You probably are familiar with the story of Wisdom, the oldest wild-known bird. It was banded by Chan Robbins, who actually had one of our positions here in Patuxent in the bird banding lab. He went and banded in this bird, C333 is the bird. It's the one that I think this year is, as I recall, 74 years this year. I think I have it here, yes. Yeah, this is Wisdom, 74. So last year was 74, this year is 75. So this bird, as you see, has a big band with a coat, and these birds come back to the same islands in the Pacific every year. And then the banders come out, capture all the birds, put bands, and they keep track the population that way. So the bird banding lab is being, just last year, we finished more than 1 million records curated. So the interesting part of these birds is that because they come back to the same island to nest every year, and because they last 70 years old, that means every year we have the bird recitings, and we have maybe dozens of recitings per year for like 50 years. So you can imagine the chain of that band, the same number repeated. And that's why the scientists analyze how all these longevity, they do survival models, they do all kinds of analytical approaches to basically understand the population. And ultimately, because of the birds are being tracked over time. So yeah, this is, like I said, Chan Robbins was the one who banded this bird for the first time. And since then, we've been following this bird. The interesting part of this one is that this is Jen McKay, one of our persons who focuses on this data set. So she has thousands of reports and keeps trying to match everything and curate everything. The interesting part of this one is that now we are tracking basically the whole family, the kids, the grandsons, and generations, and not just for Wisdom, for all these other birds, because Wisdom is 75, but there are others that are 72, 73, 71, 70. So we keep track of all these families, basically. And it's so cool because they all have names and they do a lot of outreach activities in the Pacific, like waiting for Wisdom to come, and they make a festival, social media, all that stuff, because they kind of know all these guys. So it's pretty cool that the bands and unique numbers allows us to follow this close the populations, but the individuals in a very closely relationship that we build with them. Of course, we use all our data to also, as a whole, this is a book that is coming this year. I think it came out already or it's about to come. This is Smithsonian folks, where they use all the banding and encounter data across the continent to make the connectivity. This was a well-known for connectivity project. So they analyze, and now they have a good statistical approaches to perfectly analyze what is the connectivity from one side, from the breeding to the winter areas. And they're doing this atlas of all the species of North America with very precise and analysis. Keep in mind that it's good when you have a radio or a report of abandoned bird in two places. Yeah, it makes a connection, but also the analytical people wants to analyze the data in a way that we truly know what is the strength of connectivity. And that's what they did here. So it's going to be a very important book that to have, certainly. They call it the Atlas of Migratory Connectivity. And it's out or it's coming out soon. Other examples, all our data set, working with Audubon to share all our data, all into the Bird Migration Explorer. You probably are familiar with this Bird Migration Explorer. You can go and put the bird species and you can see the movements track, because what they're doing is integrating data from the bird banding lab, the Geological Survey, eBird, tracking data, everything all together. And allows the users to see what's happening, basically. This is an example of a species. They can now see, because they have tracking data, real live tracking data. Well, actually, it's not real time, but they have all the tracking data combined with the population data and everything. So this data integration we see is the future. And what we see the importance of the long-term and large-scale data sets. Just as the visionaries in the 1900s, where they thought having a long-term data set is going to be key, well, we really can start examining not just the present, but also the past and the future. And through all these new ways, things are going to get much, much better for us in terms of understanding movements and populations of birds. This is another, they have the species connections too. This is all banding data, where you can go in. I think you can go into the app and put your address, like from your house or your backyard, and it will tell you which species and in which other locations connects your backyard across the continent. So it's a pretty cool, these species connections. Like I said, now that we have all these examples to show, definitely a long-term and large-scale repository like the one we have is just a catalyst for discovery. We can not just focus on the present, but also the past, and maybe make predictions for the future. I have a few big words there: enable early detection and emerging issues, provide baseline data for measuring change populations, which usually we do, support predictive science and modeling, the future really, validate our methods and technologies. For instance, the fact that we put a band and a band is permanent is different than a radio. Radios now, that we have tiny devices and everybody talks about radio tracking. Yes, it's great, but it costs $300 or $1,000. And also it will fall in 2 weeks or in 2 months. But the permanent bands allow the bird stays with the band for the entire lifespan. So it's really a foundational, traditional method that still is relevant, and I think it will be relevant forever. But now we can combine the bird banding data. For instance, you can band 10,000 birds of one species and maybe put a few radios on that species, and together integrate that data in a more efficient way without trying to buy 10,000 radios, right? And of course, our data continues to be a legacy for future science and conservation and cross-disciplinary applications. As you can imagine, we use our data because we have the bird in the hand. It allows us to collect the bird, to capture the bird, but collect blood, DNA, feathers, isotopes, not just the measurements and the demographic data, but even more stuff. So I'm sure in the future, we're going to have a lot of new things and new methodologies using blood or DNA, or chromosomes, all kinds of stuff that you can do now. You can do it because you have the bird in the hand. So the BBL is definitely a national resource. And just to kind of finish up, just to reflect on what's happening today, what's different today. Well, now we are aware that populations are declining badly. Lots of reports that you can see from different groups or agencies. Definitely problems going on. What we can do is definitely we need to increase our communication about these issues, talk with our people, with our community, try to participate in anything related to birds and conservation, support them as much as we can, showcase the importance of doing this is key. And for us in the BBL, we just continue our vision of nationwide constituency for conservation supporters. We know bird banding is key and engage people a lot. They're basically outdoor classrooms and can enhance the public's appreciation of birds and their habitat. So that's why we still support bird banding, and we think it's key to keep bringing the community together and see how beautiful this bird. And just to finish, just a good evidence of what I'm saying is that every time I take pictures of our banding activities, everyone shows a big smile when they have a bird in the hand. That means bring joy. And that's our currency. Like our currency is the joy of birds, definitely. And I think that's all what I have. If you have questions with Julie or Kat, you can contact me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer some.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was wonderful. We have a few questions, quite a few, so I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. Our first question is from a Facebook viewer. Does the BBL participate in banding neotropical migrants on their wintering grounds? Are they collaborating with Mexican scientists, or do you issue banding permits for neotropical migrant birds on their wintering grounds?
Our role is actually, the main role is permitting. There are a lot of American and Canadian scientists with federal permits working everywhere around the world. So yes, we receive, our database has a lot of wintering data because there's so many researchers, so many university students doing research in the wintering grounds or during stopover sites during fall migration or spring migration. And yeah, we interact with them, we support them as much as we can. But we also, I think I mentioned, we have these Banders Without Borders initiative where we connect and touch base with all the banders around. And even if countries don't have banding programs well established from the federal government, we know the banders or the main projects going on, and we try to help them as much as we can.
Yeah. Amazing. Our next question is from Gary James. They want to know, are bands placed on one leg or another based on the bird's sex?
And no, we know that I think every researcher can do the method they want. Some researchers do it in one leg, others in the other. Sometimes they have a reason why they're doing in one leg or the other, but no, it's not specifically for the agent's sex, not generally.
Okay. Luann Harris just has a comment. She says, we banded an American kestrel in Montana as a nestling, and it was recaptured by biologists in southern Mexico. She says it was one of the longest documented migrations of a kestrel. So
yeah, that's amazing. And by the way, in our website in the BBL, we have a longevity records page where we are logging all that. So you can go there and check for longevity records, because every day we are checking if there are longevity records. And when you go to the longevity page, wow, you will be amazed. There are like 45 years, 40 years, 30 years, and you can see by species also in all the records. So yeah, it's very fun to see that. And we gain a lot of information with those long-term recaptures for sure.
Great. Nora and Giselle kind of had a similar question about funding. So Giselle says, first I want to say how well the Bander portal works for reporting data. Are there any concern about federal cutbacks impacting the BBL's operations?
Well, yeah, well, if we are talking present time, well, yeah, everything is uncertain at this point for sure. So yeah, we are not just us, basically everybody's worried about what's happening or what's coming. But I should say that from a long-term perspective, it's always has been the challenge, right, to keep up with that, and we work with that as a yearly basis, and yeah, luckily 105 years and we're still here, so we hope for the best. But yeah, I know we are going through uncertain times, so for sure.
Absolutely. And Nora also wants to know, can the same bird be reported more than once? She said that
Yes.
she sees that it's not allowed. She reported a Canada goose that was 22 years old, and then she saw it again when it was 26, and she, I think, had trouble reporting it. Is this true, or is there a way to report?
No, if you go to report.gov, you can keep reporting. We actually have many people, especially people who retires, they said, I'm going to be a sighting reporter. And they go with their sponiscopes and cameras and they do hundreds of reports and they do it daily. Sometimes it's the same bird reported in the same place, which is so important because we can keep track of this bird. Like, okay, this bird has been 7 weeks in this lake, and then move to another, and then move this and move back. And it's so amazing how people is reporting is so valuable. So yeah, you can report in the site. You can do. Actually, yeah, you can report multiple times. Sometimes we get especially flashy birds, like when the flamingos moved through the U.S. We had the same bird reported hundreds of times in the same day, and sometimes multiple reports of the same people because they know it's valuable information. So yeah, you can report. Yeah, send us an email if you have any trouble. We can help you out.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yvonne would like to know, can a member of the publicly specifically request bans reported by those using depredation permits, for example, like at airports?
Probably, yeah. It will be. I will need to know more about the specific of the request, but we do have requests and we share a lot of information. Yes, of course,
Okay.
as you can imagine, there's some private information that may not be shared, but data, it's all already available everywhere. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'll just do one more question because we're kind of tight on time, but Ian would love to know if there is going to be any improvement to the standard silver leg bands. He says that with modern DSLR and mirrorless cameras, it's quite viable to get sufficient resolution of photos to identify a band, but they are really low contrast. So is there any, are you guys looking into improving the bands that you have?
So far, we don't have any plans at this point, but we've been talking about that. And yes, there are some sizes where they are more difficult to do it. Although I should say, we get reports, and sometimes the people reporting they are amazing with their eyes, with the cameras, with the bird identification, and sometimes they have the patience to just wait until the bird moves and they send 3-4 pictures in the report, and that's enough to match up the bird. So our data is also getting better and better, so hopefully matching will be much easier and faster. Even if you don't have all the numbers, you can still report in report.gov, and automatically our system will say, okay, now there are these 2 options because there's 2 numbers that are missing, but there are only 2 birds out there. So the system is getting smarter. So that will help reporters. So even if you don't have all the numbers, you can still report and you may get the answer right away. Yeah, I think you put space, or it tells you there, put a space or a dash if you don't have the number, but it still reports even if it's incomplete. So,
Great. Nora also would like if you just go back one slide so you can show your email again. I think some people would maybe like to send some questions
sure.
along. Um, we're getting close to the 1 o'clock, so I'm gonna hand it back to Julie. Thank you so much, Tony. This is really wonderful.
Thank you, Kat, for everything.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you again, Tony. We really enjoyed that. And we appreciate you taking the time to share that information with us. It is really incredible to hear the history of banding and how everything has evolved and where gotten us to where we are today and where it might be in the future. But birds definitely continue to connect us all, which is great. Um,
Yeah.
for next month, we are still finalizing our plans for lunch and learn. So we're probably most likely going to be hearing about eruptive owl movements from the north, but we're still locking that down to a date. So just stay tuned to newsletters, to our Facebook page, to our website. We'll have that information soon. And it's also Raptorathon season right now at HMA. So if you're interested in forming a team, raising some funds for your local Hawkwatch site, and grants that we offer, or just supporting a Raptorathon team, you can check out details on our website, which is hawkmigration.org. And if you're not an HMA member, we encourage you to join our kettle and support the work we do for raptors and the hawk watching community. Thanks again to everybody for joining today, for asking so many great questions. Please do follow up with Tony if we weren't able to get to your question. And I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you next month. Thanks again, Tony.